Hi everybody, welcome to Susie's chat room and another YouTube where I hope to bring someone that you will find as interesting as I do. Gary Cook. I'm at a loss to describe him because the more I've looked into what he does and what he has done, and the more that I find different aspects of him that I had not known before. So hopefully we'll cover some of those today. Gary Cook is a leading writer on the special nature of the mystic realms, and this includes the elemental and fairy realms, which I hope that you are as interested in as I am. There's lots more, and he has a special surprise for you, something that you don't hear very often. So let us not waste any more time chatting with me and speak to Gary, because I can see he's there. Hello, Gary. How are you?
I've come out sideways.
That's very clever.
Hold on a minute then. I'm doing this actually on my phone, so I'm doing it sideways. Wait a moment. I'll just redo that. Just bear with me for one moment, please.
Perfect.
We're going to have to go like that.
That's lovely.
I hope that's going to work well.
It looks to work well at this moment. And I see you're wearing the famous New Zealand Greenstone.
Oh, yes, I am. Yeah.
Is it true that you should have that given to you as a present as opposed to buying it?
It is always very significant to have it, receiving it as a gift or to gift it to other people. But if one was walking, sort of around on a riverbank and a piece of pouanamu called out and sung to you, you would bend down and pick it up. And or even if you were in a shop which was selling pendants and jewelry which is made from greenstone, something just may speak to you. So there we are. So either or, okay.
It's still a gift in a way.
It is which?
It's still a gift in a way.
It is. No, it is. It still is a gift.
Yeah. Now, I've been looking at the many things that you are involved in through your website. The one thing that I was surprised was that you're a marine archaeologist. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that's an amateur, strictly an amateur marine archaeologist.
Okay.
In a sense, I'm not qualified in any way. It's rather so. When we start, yeah, we can talk about it if you want to bring that up. I can mention that. What I'd like to be able to focus on today, if possible, I mean, you may want a sort of a broad picture, okay, of what I am and who I am and why I am today, or you may want me to focus on where I am at this particular time in my life, which is very much focusing on nature, the nature spirits, the sounds of nature, nature as a means of healing the body and the mind, and also listening to music playing. Can you hear that little bit of music in the background, or is that?
I can, yes. And the music of the plants sounds like the best kind of meditation music.
It is a very, very good form of meditation music. There, I've just brought that up a little bit for you. So have we actually started recording, or are you getting ready to go?
No, you're recording. You're live.
Oh, I didn't realize that. So I'm just having a bit of a waffle here. Okay. So, and yeah, do feel free to ask me what you will, and I will endeavor to answer any questions or queries that you bring up to the best of my ability. Okay.
You mentioned about nature, and I've got a quote here. You said, transform your life through nature or the fairy connection. Now, there's not a lot of people that talk about the fairy connection. And I would like to ask you, do you see fairies?
I don't see fairies per se. My involvement with fairies is mostly to do with hearing them. And over a long period of time, I have been privileged to hear the fairies, hear them singing, hear them chatting, hear them laughing. You see, in this land, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the fairies are known by the ancient Māori people as the Patupai Arehi. And the Patupai Arehi are forest dwellers in the main. Now, all the encounters that my wife Raven and myself have had with the Patupai Arehi have been in remote outdoor places or on the edge of forests or within forests. My involvement with them at home, in my forest land at home here where I live, is a little different again. So when I say hearing them, I'll give you one fine example of a number of years ago. We were staying at a weekend retreat at a lodge in the Puri Ora forest, which is a massive native forest in the central part of the North Island of New Zealand. And I often went to this forest with groups on retreats and things like this, not as a host or anything, but just as a participant. And on this particular time, probably my fourth or fifth time there, sleeping in my little bunk room, this was sort of a big forest cabin set up. And I just nestled down in the little room I had to myself in the lower bunk and snuggled down in my sleeping bag. And suddenly I heard tapping on the window just right by my head. And I heard laughter. And I thought, oh my gosh, what on earth's going on? Now, I was aware of the fact that there were 3 or 4 young children had come with their parents, with one family. And they ranged probably from 7 or 8 years of age down to about 3 or 4. And I thought, oh my gosh, what are these children doing? So I struggled out in the dark and tripped over my sleeping bag and got up and sort of up to the window, pulled the curtains back and looked outside, moonlight night, or quite moonlight, nothing. And I sort of threw the window open and looked out the window and looked left and right, nothing there. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I closed the window, pulled the blinds and back down, and was just getting back into my sleeping bag. And then suddenly there was tap, 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 tap on the window and childlike laughter or giggling. Now, this time I was better prepared, or so I thought, because I was not yet tied up in my sleeping bag. And I leapt up, threw the curtains back, threw the window open, because I knew how to do it quickly, looked out, not a person in sight. And when I looked out the window, looking down both sides to the left or right along the building and out in the big grass area there in the forest in the distance, nothing. And I thought, my gosh, those little kids down the passageway further with their mum and dad and a couple of other people sharing a bunk room, they're probably up and about. So dived, well, still out of bed, grabbed my torch, rushed off down the passageway and sort of didn't storm into the room, crept into the room, shone the torch around, and I knew where the little kids were staying in their little beds over there. They were fast asleep, snug as anything. And I thought, oh my gosh, what on earth can I put this down to? I mean, we were miles away from anywhere else. There were no other neighbors nearby. And so the next morning, I mentioned this to the elder, the Kaumatawa, Wiramu Turnā. Wiramu, I said, I had something happen last night. Perhaps you can explain this to me. And I explained what had happened. He said, oh, don't worry. That was the Patupai Rehi. They'd come to greet you. I said, what do you mean? He said, they know who you are. They just come to tap on your window and let you know that they knew you and to acknowledge you. And I said, is this right? He said, oh, yes. He said, I was out last night about 2 o'clock this morning, standing in the back veranda out there having a cigarette. And he said, they're all over the place laughing and chuckling out there. He said, so that's what it was. I thought, oh. So this is the sort of thing that has occurred on a number of occasions to my wife, Raven, and myself. We have had experiences like this, voices in the forest. And often I remember once we were on an ancient sacred site in the far north of New Zealand, and we'd been exploring as amateur archaeologists to try and find some traces of where a very ancient people had once lived. And we'd been up behind the sand dunes there in the coastal forest or coastal bush for the best part of an hour, walking all around it. The coastal bush was quite interesting because it's not the lush green growth you get, which you could have to make your way through. It was very open. You could see for many meters, if not hundreds of meters in some directions. So we're looking for traces of an ancient village, which we had been told was in the area. And we'd been around, 5 of us in the group, probably for a couple of hours, and we came to a place where we found an ancient sort of watercourse. We found a little dam, a place which was either a natural pool, which was fed by a spring, which is amazing, a freshwater spring in the sand dunes, filling this little pond and then flowing on down the hill further. So we thought, well, this is a beautiful place. There was moss on the ground there under these beautiful trees, very still. We thought, well, we'll stop here and have a drink and have something to nibble. So we just sat down there and we weren't really chatting to each other. We were just busy nibbling on our bars and things and having a drink of water. And then suddenly, voices talking in the forest. And I sort of looked at the others and I said, listen, can you hear that? And I said, yes, yes, yes. They said, we can hear voices. Someone's talking. I said, gosh, there's someone else up here. I said, we were actually miles and miles away from anywhere. We really were. We'd gone right into the major sand dunes and the back of the sand dunes there. And I said, well, that's interesting. We might meet some more people who might be local and they might have some information. So we heard voices. It was 2 voices. We couldn't make out whether a male or female. And they were sort of behind a little ridge which came down, much coming from the direction we had just come from and where we sat down by the little pool. And so the voices were getting louder and louder. So 3 of us stood up to sort of look and step out a bit to look round this little ridge and say g'day and hello to whoever was coming. But the voices continued right in front of us, and disappeared out stage left. And we all looked at each other. We were just quite speechless, actually. We couldn't believe what had occurred. Although there was one member of our party there who once again mentioned Te Patapaerehi. And so we thought, wow, let us then follow the direction of where the voices went. Perhaps it may lead us to something we're looking for. And lo and behold, we did come across something which was quite an anomalous find in those sand dunes and which certainly helped with our research. So that's just 2 incidents, and as I say, it's voice or singing, often like children playing in the forest in the background. So there we are. But no sightings.
Well, you've given 2 examples where on hearing what you now label as the elemental fairy folk, that you've been surprised. So have you reached a stage now where you hear them and you know who they are immediately and you're not surprised at all?
Yes, perhaps not surprised, but if this happens again, as it has once or twice, I'm quite overjoyed, because then I can understand that I'm open at that particular time to whatever is going on around me. I'm just sort of am perhaps super sensitive or super aware. And it's very much to do with location. And we have a beautiful forest at home here. And I'm well aware of the presence of the fairy folk in the forest there. Only aware of the presence. I acknowledge them repeatedly. And For myself, who only hears and doesn't see, I have a couple of good friends who come to visit quite often, and they see them all the time. So I find it quite gratifying for them to explain to me what they're seeing at a particular time. And seeing not just one or two individuals, but seeing a lot collectively. So this is interesting. It doesn't concern me too much whether or not I see them. I understand they're there. I acknowledge them all the time. And if I am privileged to hear from them, and also I'll tell you something else too that, Susie, which is quite important, is being open to receiving messages when you're in the garden or in the forest or somewhere out of doors. And sometimes messages can be in quite an obscure way. Like I know that some people react to seeing a solitary bird's feather on the ground and things of this nature, or the rustling of the leaves, or the song of a bird which suddenly appears and just sort of sings to you. So it seems that there are ways that nature communicates with you. So that's probably all I can really say about my personal involvement. My deeper involvement has really been with collecting stories and anecdotes from many, many people around the country over a long period of time. When we were doing our amateur archaeological work on the beaches and the forest up north, we used to come across a lot of farmers and hunters, and we were always open to speak to them about things of this nature. And we get so many stories back. And we found that around particular forest areas or heavily forested areas where the farmers were often in contact with the forest on their boundary, or the hunters went through the farms and into the forest to hunt. And so often they would have encounters, physical encounters, where they would see little beings which they could describe to us. And I collected a number. It's when we were researching for the documentary, we made a documentary on this actually, which is was a great journey. And before we did the documentary, I advertised in a number of newspapers in the northern part of New Zealand. And I just laid it out who I was, what I was looking for, and if you have any stories to share with encounters or beings or an unexplained encounter you may have had in the forest, just let me know. So we had a number of replies. And that, of course, some of those replies we had, we did reenactments of those stories in the documentary we made. So the documentary
made, Voices in the Forest?
That's right, yes. Voices in the Forest.
Yeah.
So we went out to be really pushy, and we went out to actually try and film whatever these beings or however they may appear in various forest locations at nighttime. That proved to be quite fruitless, actually. And I soon learned from that, well, this is not what you do. If you are going to have an encounter, it has to come on a different basis. But I must say, at one particular stage, we were doing a daylight filming of a reenactment in a forest in the far north, amongst the beautiful big trees up there. And the reenactment was of a lady walking on a forest track, responding to hearing the laughter of little children on the side of the path she was walking upon. And as she was being filmed, the cameraman was walking backwards, being guided backwards. She was walking towards the camera. And we didn't realize at the time, but over her shoulder, behind a couple of big trees over her left shoulder, there was something going on which we didn't see. We were focusing on her. So a few nights later, when we came to edit those clips and we're going through them on the big screen, lo and behold, we did capture something. We captured something. We captured movement. We captured something moving and walking behind. Once again, we were in such a remote part of a forest that you just wouldn't believe it. So I was so sort of moved by this white shape we saw moving, obviously behind a tree, and looking back and turning back and looking and going on, that I actually got in touch with the forestry workers and their manager. And I said, listen, I said, on a particular day, I said, do you have your foresters going out in these forests and wearing white protective gear as if they're spraying or looking for things? He said, oh, nothing like that, he said. And in that particular area you were in, no, we just don't wear white protective suits because we don't go around spraying noxious substances on weeds or invasive plants. So we did capture something. And that's, I guess, that's the only time I've actually seen something, which is quite interesting.
Yes, I read that you said that the Maori or Māori folklore speaks about small fairy folk 3 to 4 foot tall, fair-haired, or occasionally witnessed with red hair and green or blue eyes with pale skin. Do you think that these were once visible in that area, that they sort of predated the Maori population?
That's interesting you put it that way, Susie, because the the idea behind the documentary was to look at both of those premises. First, were these actually a fairy folk, and they lived in the forest, like the fairy folk of the European forests and the other forests around the world? Or are they indeed the remnants of a lost tribe, just a small group of people that live in pockets or in communities in these vast forest areas? So we went with this in view, actually, with this in mind. As it turns out, there is a lot of evidence from Māori and from early explorers coming to New Zealand, including the governor of New Zealand, Sir George Grey, who actually had encounters with the Patapai. And they were well described as being quite small in posture, being less than 4 foot, 3.5 to 4 foot tall. And as you just gave that description, being fair of countenance, fair of hair, red of hair, or white of hair, and blue or green of eyes. So this is a description which was given in Maori folklore, in Maori legends, and even for people today. I think I must share one of the most exciting things, one story I got from up north, which really precipitated us to have a good look at things, was this was in April, I don't know how many years ago now, probably 15 years ago, 12, 15 years ago, an April evening, on a Friday evening, and there was a group of young forestry workers. There was 5 to 6 of them in this forestry van heading back. They'd been working in the pine plantations adjoining the big native forest for the week, and they were heading back home on Friday night to the rural township of Dargaville where they all lived. And to get home, they had to drive for quite a way through the Waipoua forest, which is a massive forest up north. This is the home of all the giant kauri trees we all hear about. And so they were driving home, and it was probably 8 to 8:15. They were late getting away, and they were driving down through the forest, tar sealed road, and there were 2 of them sitting in the front seat, and the others were in the back seats, all sort of dozing off a bit and not paying much attention. In their mind, of course, was getting home, and also there was a tavern about another 20, 25 minutes down the road where they normally stopped at this tavern, had a few beers, and went on home. This was a Friday night tradition. So as they were winding down the road through the kauri trees there, with kauri trees incidentally flashing by, sort of in the headlights on the side of the road, they came around a corner, and suddenly the driver saw something which made him slam the brakes on immediately. The whole van just came to a juddering halt. Everyone was thrown around in the back, and they're all suddenly awake. And said, what's going on? What's going on? And then they looked to where the driver and the passenger in the front seat were just looking through the windscreen in the headlights of the van. And in the headlights of the van was a line of school children, they thought, walking across. There were children, little children, walking across the headlights from the right-hand side of the road up into the left-hand side. They said there were probably 18 to 20 but they weren't counting. Now, these little beings were walking slowly across the road, from the downside of the road up a bank between a couple of big kauri trees and disappearing. Now, they were fully illuminated, and what went through the people's minds, and of course things which were voiced, was, oh, first of all, what on earth are these school children doing out here at night time like this? Where are the teachers? Oh, they've got no torches. Where's the high-vis gear? All this was going on. And suddenly one of the Māori boys, because there were four young Māori men there, he said, oh, he said, those are not children. He said, those are the pataparehi. Suddenly, the van, the driver told me everyone went quiet. And he said, everyone just stared. And the little people walked across in the headlights slowly without even looking at the van and just disappeared up the side. And they went out of sight, and then there was the first thing was from the back seat, oh, let's get out of here, let's get out of here. So there was a fear. There was something which was not, they weren't happy. So they drove on. And of course, further down the road was the tavern they normally stop at for a drink. They didn't want to stop that night. They went straight home and were dropped off at their home. So we had affidavits from three of them, the driver and two of the passengers. And one of the passengers said, oh, there's no way I will ever drive through that forest again at night time. He was a young Māori man and fully versed in the stories of the Pataparehi, who in ancient times could be quite mischievous and could play tricks on Māori people and do all sorts of things which made them uncomfortable. So that was one story. And then it just so happens that a fortnight ago, I had an 84-year-old man get in touch with me from up north. And he said, I want to tell you a story, he said. He said, and I've sat on this for 70 years. I think it was 70 years. 70 years. I said, what? He said, yes. Back in the late 1940s, early 50s, I forget when it was exactly. I've got it written down. He said, I was and my wife were driving down through Waipua Forest. And he said, my old car, suddenly the lights went out, he said. So I pulled into the side of the road and could hardly see a thing. Got out, he said, got the bonnet up and started to fiddle with the wires in the car there. And I knew there were a wiring fault. I knew there was loose. And he said, as I sort of got the wires and jiggled around, he said, the lights came back on. And there in front of me were four little people walking across the road. Now, he said, I have sat with this for all these years. And he said, I've never told anybody because I've been too apprehensive. I've been frightened of being ridiculed. I didn't want to upset anybody. I didn't want people to think that I was a bit porangi or a bit mad. And it's quite intriguing because the story he gave me just recently was within a very short distance of where the forestry workers experienced the same sort of thing. So there's something going on in the forest. But I mean, this is the sort of thing that goes on in the forests in your land too, in Australia, in forests all over the world. I mean, I've been collecting stories and I read so much, I'm doing so much research on fairies around the world. They're everywhere. It's just that we have forgotten. They don't figure in our lives. A lot of us though, Susie, may be able to recollect that in our childhood, we played with friends, we played with human friends, we played with imaginary friends. And sometimes we didn't have human friends, we had imaginary friends. And these imaginary friends were so real to us. They were very real indeed. And particularly, I remember one report I got from a man many, many years ago. He lived way, way up a remote valley with his mum and dad. He was an only child. And he said, the only children I had to play with were the children which came out of the forest in the evening and early in the morning on the edge of the forest, and I go and play with them. So there we are. I think possibly all of us may have something in our deeper memory which we came in contact or had an experience when we were very young. But of course, these things are quite fleeting for many. And of course, as we go to school, peer pressure is applied. We don't talk about these things to everybody, probably not even to our parents, let alone our schoolmates. And so these things go. So I often say to people, just think back to, if you can, to those times when you used to have your imaginary play, making cups of tea, and for whoever was your hidden or invisible guest.
Well, children would be more open because they absorb everything that's going on around them, and they're at an age when fear has not been learned. The adult, if they see something that they cannot identify, they either dismiss it and find a reason for it, or they're fearful or don't talk about it. And that's why it's so important that people like yourself draw out these stories that we should all be able to listen to and relate to.
You're so right, Susie. You're right, and it's that's why I have great joy in talking about these things and sharing what little I know, and my studies still go on. I am buying all the time. I'm buying copies of obscure books which have been published overseas, some published, sort of 100 years ago, and by an author who no longer is known in the public arena. But these are people who were folklorists and used to actually record folklores and fairy stories, and particularly from the UK, Ireland, and parts of Europe. But as well as that, I have been able to access documents and books which have been published on the fairies as they appeared to many, many North American Indian tribes, to the Aboriginal people in Australia, to the people in Hawaii, the people in Samoa. So once you start to go around the world, there are stories of contacts or a relationship, even a deep relationship, with these elusive forest people. It's interesting too, Susie, when we say forest people, a lot of the descriptions are around beings in the forest, but a lot of the stories that I've collected in New Zealand have occurred either at night time on a road, or will occur in a park, in an urban area, or even in people's own gardens. So it doesn't mean to say that the fairy folk, for want of a better description, I use that quite broadly because there are so many different descriptions of who they are, how they look, and what they are, and how they react. But they're there all the time. I've no doubt about that.
Yes, absolutely. They wouldn't just happen to be there at the time that you needed to listen to and listen for them. So when you think of these fairy folk, not necessarily of the forest, does this mean that the average person can connect with them in their own garden?
I guess really it would depend on why a person would really want to make the connection. What is their true purpose? Is it just idle curiosity? Or would it be something which is just a bit deeper, suddenly becomes a bit of a compulsion? And the fact that it may be that suddenly becoming aware of the term fairy once again in their lives, and reading something or listening to someone like me talk, it clicks something inside deep in their memory, and they say, wow, yes, that's something I would feel comfortable doing. I would like to do that. I don't think it actually happens like that. We proved this when we went out filming in the forest at night time. We had all sorts of equipment for night vision, you name it. We could film anything, anywhere. We would catch whoever was there in the forest, walking around behind the trees. And we spent many nights out in the forest in the early hours of the morning, not recording anything at all. But what we did record, as I said, was in the daytime, but we did record a few sounds, which were happening in the forest. So I think your intention has to be quite good and quite pure. if I like to put it that way.
Maybe it's nothing about the personal intention. Maybe it's all about their perception of why they should allow any kind of connection. They would know better than we do.
I think so, and yet this, this all sounds quite mysterious, but I think you're quite right, actually, and that's the way I would look at it myself. And it seems that there are all sorts of ancient ways and means in folklore that you could see the fairies, but in a lot of folklore, the fairies are not to be sort of dealt with lightly. They were something which you had to have great respect for. The fairies had great respect for the people of the land, the farmers and things like this. And respect was two-way. If you disrespected the fairy or their dwelling place or a fairy mound, or you walked in and disturbed a fairy circle of mushrooms, folklorists tell us that a lot of people suffered quite badly from doing something which was almost irreverent, without paying attention to the traditions of the fairy and how you treat them. But we don't seem to have that depth in this country. And it's quite interesting too. I thought a while ago, only a few months ago, that it is possible and probable that when the settlers left the old lands of Europe to come to Australia and New Zealand, they brought fairies with them. They brought their fairy beings with them. Now, a number of years ago, when we were living in a little rural town in the Bay of Plenty, I got to know an elderly lady and her husband who had immigrated to New Zealand many, many years before. I got to know them, and I was walking in their garden one day with the lady who everyone called Granny Beth. Now, Granny Beth was born on the Isle of Sark, and as she told me a little of her history, she was the fifth or sixth in a line of seers. And she said, when we came to live in New Zealand, my husband and myself, our elven friend traveled with us, and he's in the garden here today. And I said, I guess that's his area down there in the wild side, in the wild part of the garden. She said, oh, yes. She said, how do you know that? I said, well, I just assume this is where he would live. She said, yes. And he came with us. We'd already moved twice, she said, within New Zealand, and he traveled with us all the time. And so I have a feeling that there is, in Australia and New Zealand, there is a homogenous mix amongst the fairy dwellers, which I find quite intriguing. This is something I'm pursuing at the moment to try and see if I can bring out more stories along these lines. Every time I request stories to do with these connections, I get a great number of responses, and some have a great depth to them. But where I've gained a lot of supportive information has been from the Faerie Investigation Society of England, which was set up probably 8 or 9 years ago by a professor of medieval history at Oxford University, a man by the name of Dr. Simon Young. And he wished to, as a folklorist and a researcher, look into stories around fairies. And he said, it's obvious from what some people have been doing, some people in the modern age have been collecting modern fairy stories, things which are happening to people today. So he started a worldwide fairy census for the Faerie Investigation Society. And he invited people through Facebook and other mediums to send in little anecdotes, little stories of experiences they had. And I think the first publishing that he did after the first 2 to 3 years, he had 700 stories he published.
Wow.
This is all online. You can go online and look at the Faerie Investigation Society, go into their archives, and you can read through hour upon hour of anecdotes from all around the world, including Australia and New Zealand. And so, as he said, and other people say, well, something's going on a lot of the stories that he had collected were from people who had a childhood experience and it had lived with them forever in their heart and their mind, and they were able to share that. And so within the census, there were certain questions that were asked of the person. What age were they, and what sex were they, where they lived, and all this sort of thing, just getting a bit of background on age and of course when the encounter took place. And a lot of them, of course, were recording, as I said, childhood encounters, which were still quite vivid. So there we are. There's a lot of information out there for those who wish to delve.
And I'm sure more and more people are wishing to delve. Maybe because obviously we talk about our own vibration and the vibration of the earth that is becoming more intense, that we're raising what we are able to observe more easily now in this almost a new dimension that's appearing before us. So possibly these elementals, these fairy folk, are in another dimension, and a dimension that we couldn't see at all at one stage, and then we perhaps allowed a little information and then a little bit more information. And so something we can look forward to as we ascend is to come closer to the dimension that they and other amazing creatures probably reside in. Do you feel this might be the case?
Oh, I think so. And this is exactly right, because in the biosphere of this planet, there are many life forms. The life forms that we all know of, those that we see every day, and those that we encounter by watching documentaries of the wild areas of the planet and the depths of the oceans. But there are other beings living alongside, and also it's quite interesting talks I've had with Maori people, with the elders, with Kaumātua. We've spoken about some reasons behind why the Patapaerehi want to make a little more connection with the people of the world today, because I think they're suddenly aware that humans are going down a pathway which is not very, very good for the environment. But let's face it, we share the same environment.
Yeah.
We live in the same biosphere. They are there at a slightly different vibration, and we see them or we don't, or we hear them or we don't, but they share. And I know that one clairvoyant man I know very, very well, he said that these little people are quite nomadic, and they move around the country through the forests and across the fields and along the beaches in search of food. He said some of them are almost tribal. And I know a number of years ago too, when I was getting ready to get information for the documentary, I spoke to a friend of mine who is a very, very, very good remote viewer. And you know what remote viewing is? Yes. And I said to him, would you be able to go into this big, beautiful, big forest up north and identify somewhere in the forest where the little people may gather or may live together? And he came up with 2 places for me after he got back to me after a week. And he gave me the coordinates and everything, the longitude and latitude coordinates, which were both right in the midst of this massive forest area up there, which is so precipitous and so like this. But he said, and that's where there are 2 different groups live. And also my clairvoyant friend who appears in the documentary. And whilst we're actually filming in the forest, while the film crew was down there doing what they do, he and I were talking. And he said, they're all around us now looking at what we're doing. They're so inquisitive. They're so curious. And he said, there's a couple of them have just moved down that hill. And he pointed across the river. And he said, they're standing in the trees there. There's someone up behind us too. He said, we have raised their curiosity in what we are doing here in the forest today. So this made me realize just how close these little people are, how close to us they are.
So do you think the orbs that people are now picking up when they're taking photographs? Are they sort of like spirit orbs that might be connected to the fairy folk?
Some people have, Susie, have made that connection. I have not made that connection. I do a terrific amount of photograph or photography, photograph nature all the time. And occasionally I might photograph orbs, but very, very rarely indeed, very rarely. I don't go out of my way to photograph them. What I do photograph so often are things hidden in the foliage, little faces which are looking out. And I often say to people that when you do go into an area, a garden area, a forest area, in amongst the mountains, and do take photographs, lots and lots of photographs, you know. Don't spend your whole time looking through the camera. Do what you want, then put it away. And then when you get home and you start to go through your photographs and you put them up on your computer and you get a big, large image, I said, you might be amazed at what might be peering out from behind the rocks.
Yeah.
Through the undergrowth. And this so often happens. But no, orbs have not figured in anything I do at all with my photography.
So moving on to Music of the Forest, your CD, this is quite relevant because you're actually playing something, not from the forest, but beside you. Can you tell us the music that we've heard, the sounds that we've heard in the background, how are these being produced?
Wow, that's interesting. What I'll do, I'll just turn the sound up a little. It's all running through a speaker here. So now I'm just going to move my phone here and I'm going to share with you where the sound is coming from here in the kitchen at home. Now that is my dear peace lily, Sabella.
Wow.
Sabella and I have been playing music together for the last 7 years, since I bought my first device in from overseas. Now, I hope you can see her. I'm at quite an angle here.
Yes,
Here we are.
you beautifully.
That's her. She has been playing this music all the time we've been talking.
Yeah.
So she is sensitive to, you might see a couple of small contacts I have on the leaves. So I touch her leaves with my hand. Hear the song change.
Fascinating, isn't it?
I'm sorry if that's a bit shaky. I'm just hand holding this at the moment.
No, that's perfect.
So just once more. Well, there we are.
I love that. That's how I first found you. Somehow that you were playing, you were in the forest and you were getting all these beautiful sounds like an orchestra from the forest.
That's right.
And I thought that is so amazing. I knew that that could be done, but I hadn't seen it done in the way that you had done it. Do you feel that this peace lily has a consciousness? I mean, the fact that it changes the sound when you touch it could be just a reaction to you touching it, or is there a deeper connection between you and the peace lily?
There is a deeper connection between myself and my wife and our peace lily. just as there is a deeper connection with every person, with every plant or tree that exists. And this is the big thing. This is bigger than fairies.
Yes.
No, this is.
No, you might offend them.
No, I believe also that the plant elementals have a lot to do with the music that the tree or the plant produces. So that's something to consider as well. Now the right, no, she's just singing so beautifully. So whether we go into the forest or we sit in the garden, we've got a massive garden area here as well, with thousands and thousands of plantings that my wife Rowan has done over the years. And we'll sit down and we'll listen to plants playing. I know that about 4 years ago, a New Zealand magazine, Home and Garden, came and did an 8-page spread on our gardens. And they call them the singing gardens, which they are, because everything sings. And I just love taking people around the gardens and sitting down listening to a plant or two sing. Now, plant consciousness. Now, when I put my hand on the leaf of Peace Lily, her song changed. The same on a tree trunk. If I'm listening to a tree, the song will change. Now, also, I've given a lot of talks and demonstrations over the years throughout New Zealand. And most of them were in an outdoor situation or in very, very close proximity to trees, growing naturally in the ground, in the forest, on the edge of the forest. And we would sit there, 50, 60, 80, 100 people, and I'd take them through a journey and what this is all about and our connection with the plants and talking about plant consciousness and plant awareness. They would hear the plants singing, and all the time I'd be plugged into, connected to a tree there, and would sing. And then towards the end, I'd say, now we're going to do a couple of things. And I want us all to stand up and just gather around in a great big circle with the plant, all looking at the plant. Now I want you to focus your attention on the plant. And because you've just been sitting here listening to me talking and listening to her playing all this time, you can now acknowledge her with all your love and understanding and your feeling. And of course, people focus on that. And whilst we're all there, not touching the plant song will change. You can hear it change. And people around me will burst into tears or just almost faint because suddenly they're overwhelmed. But also then, something which I often do if it's a slightly more compact group, and I'll say, is there anyone here who would like to sing to the plant or to do a sounding? And so there is always someone who would just love to do it. So someone will come up and stand over there in front of the plant, and we'll be standing back. Sometimes we could hear the music they were making with their voice. Other times it was hard to hear. But one of the most amazing things that occurred that a few years ago, when I was at a festival, the small group I took into the forest, there was a big, well-built man there, very, very nice personality. And he said, I'll go and sing. I thought, oh, that's great. So he walks up to the plant at a distance, and we were all standing back. There was only about 15 or 20 of us in this group at this time. And we could hear his voice. And we were aware of, this was a kawa tree, a small kawa bush that we were listening to, that we'd hooked up to. And he was singing, and we could hear the plant, we could hear his song changing and doing things, and we could hear his voice. We couldn't make out any words. But then he stopped and turned round and walked back towards us, tears streaming down his face. And he said, wow, he said, I'm an operatic singer. And he said, I have never sung with a plant or been able to perform with the plant, and the plant performed with me, which was just incredible. He was just so overtaken with emotion. And likewise, I have experimented with human musicians, because what we do with the plant music, with the devices we've got, we're just giving the plants an instrument to play, okay? And we sort of select little instruments, sort of technically, and then the plant can play them and make the music on those instruments. Now, I have had solo musicians, violin player, cello player, harps, stringed instruments are wonderful, actually. And it's been wonderful to sit and record these various musicians sitting on the edge of the forest here, playing cello to a kawakawa at home on the edge of the forest, and listening and watching and recording them playing a few notes, stopping, listening to the kawakawa bush play back, and the little bush would stop playing and he would play some more notes and the kawakawa would play back, and this went on to and fro. I guess that if they spent many days playing together, they could have really come together in an incredible harmony. So likewise, with the violinist I had here, and she was able to pick all those beautiful notes out with the resonance, playing with Peace Lily inside here on a wet sunny Sunday afternoon. And it was just amazing. And she would play and stop, and Peace Lily would be going, do, 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 whatever. And then Peace Lily would sort of slop her down and she would play. And so it was like some sort of duet they were playing. So we can connect, because plants and trees, we underestimate them so, because we've taken them so much for granted. The vegetables we grow in the garden, we take a little bit for granted, most of us. They're there to give us sustenance and food. Plants we put in the garden, and shrubs for flowers and beauty and form. Trees that we may plant, bigger trees and the orchard trees, or the fact we may live on the edge of a forest. It is so easy to take plants for granted, and there's a lot of amazing scientific research being done now into plant consciousness. And I'm following a lot of the researchers and reading their papers. And it's amazing what's coming through. Because, such things as some of the papers, some of the scientists are now finding that plants can think and choose and remember. You can use the energy of a tree to bring about self-healing. And people are actually looking at, can plant music accelerate healing? That's a question. And the ecologists say trees talk to each other in a language that we can learn.
Yeah.
So, heard of forest therapy, so yeah.
I think in Japan they're actually promoting forest walks that are there for healing purposes.
That's exactly right. And this was a government edict, which was put in place more than 20, 25 years ago, where they said the people of Japan must go and walk in the forests as often as they can for their well-being. So this then became forest healing. And now, of course, this has been taken on in the Western world as a way and a means of helping well-being. So the biggest thing which has come out of the research is one particular phrase, which is called plant blindness. And this is put forward by a neurobiologist, which is a new term, by the way. Neurobiology is a study of the consciousness or the brain of a plant. That's a biggie. And he said in a lecture he was giving about 4 years ago in Italy, he says, we all suffer from plant blindness. We are surrounded by plants and trees everywhere we go. And I use the example of the fact that you go to your front door in the morning and you open it to go out down the pathway to go and get the bus or get your car and go to work. And as you walk out the door, the dog will be sitting on the step there and you say, "G'day," and pat the dog, say, "See you later." Walk down the path through the garden. The cat's there. You acknowledge the cat laying in the sun. The bird may be in the tree singing, and you may be aware of that, saying, "Oh, that sounds beautiful." But all the way down to the gate, you've been walking past these beautiful trees and these plants in the garden, and you haven't acknowledged them. You haven't said, "Oh my gosh, you're so beautiful. Good day, how are you?" So there we are. It is possible. Some people say that they have wonderful conversations with plants. And of course, we can all remember the Lord of the Rings and the Ents in the forest giants, the trees. And like those forest giants, the Ents, trees can be very slow responding. And it's no good in the busyness of a world leaping into the forest or up to the tree in the bottom of the garden, sort of saying, "G'day, how are you? I love you. Look, can you help me to get through this busy day? Okay, I'm away." So you've spoken to the tree, you've explained that you're not having a very good day or not going to have a very good day. Can you help me? And off you go. But the plant would respond to you, but it just takes time, like the Ents. It doesn't happen straight away. So if you ever wish to exchange little things with the plant and even enter into some sort of basic conversation, you have to be patient. You have to spend some time there. You have to put forward who you are and perhaps raise a question that you may wish to have an answer for, and then sit and wait and be patient, and an answer will come. So there we are.
Sorry, I think too that people who are interested have to hone their skills of telepathy, because I believe that's the way that you will hear the responses.
Yep. Although I often say too, in helping to hone those skills, when you do go into a new area for a time, a garden or a park or a forest, and so often we will walk up to the entranceway and there'll be some beautiful trees standing there, and you can say, "Hello, tree," and "How are you?" and introduce yourself and exchange a few pleasantries if you wish, sing a song to the plant or the tree. And then I say, before you carry on walking into the forest or the gardens or the park, wait. Now, when you do introduce yourself to the tree, do it with your eyes closed. Focus on either what you're saying or what you're thinking. You're talking about telepathy. What you're thinking. If you're with a big group of people, your thoughts will be your thoughts only, and you're directing them at the tree. So, don't just leap off on the rest of the walk and hurry through the forest. Wait for a time there. Now, you slowly open your eyes after a period of time. And because you've had your eyes closed, everything around you is bright and the vision is quite clear. Also, because you've been focused on the tree, your ears and your hearing has been focused on where you are too. But suddenly, even your hearing is more acute. So then you may be aware of the fact the whole time you were there was a bird in the tree next to the one you were talking to, sitting up on the branch there. It wasn't even singing, but it was there all the time, just looking at you. You can look up and think, "Oh my gosh." The bird may sing, "Oh my gosh." Now, this is like an acknowledgement coming back through another being. And also, while you're standing there quietly, anticipating a response, a leaf may fall off the tree, and down it comes just like that. And it's not a windy day or anything like that, and that leaf just falls through. Is that another response? And also, at the entranceway you're going through there may be a little bank, a cutting there, and there may be moss on there. And there may be a little drip of water coming down the mossy bank, which from the rainfall the night before, and you weren't aware of, you hadn't heard it, but now you hear it, you become aware of it. And also, in the distance, you may hear the sound of children laughing, and you may think, "Oh my gosh, there must be a lot of children in the forest today. That's interesting." Is it? But something else that you will so often feel. And this can be in a place where there's no wind, no breeze, the leaves are not moving at all. And suddenly you'll feel around you'll go whoosh, and almost enough to stir your hair. And that is what the Maori call the wairua. That is the spirit wind. And so this will respond. So there are so many ways. Now, then when you say thank you and you move on into the forest, you've no need to, unless you really feel compelled to introduce yourself to every tree in the forest, because they will already know you because of the forest network. And you've probably heard the phrase that has been being used now called the wood wide web. So there is a web of communication right through a forest. Every tree is connected to every other tree and every other plant, every fully mature tree and every seedling. So there we are. Well, it's been an hour and I'm getting a bit hoarse here. So
well, it's been wonderful listening to you, and I do appreciate the time that you've given to us, because I mean, there's so much more that we could speak about. So maybe another time we could continue going down different avenues, or enlarging on the avenues that we've already travelled.
I think we could enlarge. There's so much more to share.
There is.
So if that is what you will, I'd be honoured to do another little session with you.
Oh, the honour would be all mine. I love to hear you speak, and the wisdom that comes out so naturally is just amazing. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of tree huggers born today when they hear this.
I think so too.
and a lot more attention to their plants in the house as well. So yes, we will continue, and I do thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Susie, look, thank you so much for inviting me, and I've enjoyed sitting with you. It's been wonderful. And you can still hear the music playing in the background there?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
It is just so divine. Okay, my love, well, look, many thanks to you, and
thank you.
Blessings to all who may hear the words that we've shared today.
Thank you.